Bringing our assets into the project from 3ds Max first requires that we install the DATASMITH export plugin. We're going to find that in the Epic Games launcher. So if we bring that up and go to the library panel, down below you'll find under Unreal Studio Beta a link to the 3ds Max exporter. Simply click the Get button here to bring up the website where you can download that. On the Unreal Engine website here, if you scroll down, you'll find the link to download Autodesk's 3ds Max exporter for version 4.20 or version 4.19 here. Make sure to download the 4.20 preview version here. Click the download button and save it wherever you'd like to save it. Once it finishes downloading, we'll go ahead and double click it to install it. We'll accept the license terms and hit next. Hit next again. I'm using 3ds Max 2018 and we'll hit install. Once it finishes installing and we launch 3ds Max, we'll find we now have the ability to export a DATASMITH file. This is the file format that DATASMITH uses to transfer all of your 3D assets out of 3ds Max into Unreal. We'll go to the File menu here and choose Export. And in the Export window here, scroll down to the file type and you'll see DATASMITH. Let's go ahead and close that window for now and talk about some of the things in our scene here that DATASMITH is going to work with. Looking at the chair assets here, you'll notice that we have several copies of this chair, and these chairs are all instances of each other in 3ds Max. When we export this scene, DATASMITH will respect these instances so that it will only create one asset in our Unreal project. So Unreal has the concept of assets where the assets can be used multiple times in a scene, but they are stored in the project folder as a singular object. So because of instancing, these chairs will actually only be one asset in our project that we can then drag into the scene, creating multiple instances. And when we export this entire scene at once, those chairs that are already in the scene will be in our scene in Unreal. They'll already be there and they will be instances of each other. Likewise, our pivot points here on these glasses, we can see that the pivot point on this glass is at the very bottom of the glass, and then we have a pivot point on this glass which is at the very top. DATASMITH will respect the location of these pivot points when they're brought into Unreal. Likewise, however, as we're exporting an entire scene, these glasses, their pivot points will be based on the world origin. So when you bring them in, they're going to be located in the correct position in the scene, and their pivot point in the scene will be tied to the 000 or world origin area of the scene. The lights here will be brought into Unreal Engine as well, but bear in mind that DATASMITH does not support instanced lights. So each light, even if it's an instance here in 3ds Max, will be brought in as a separate light with different controls. Now the things that will be respected include the position and orientation of the light, so they'll be in the right spot and rotated in the correct direction in the scene. Also the type of light, so point lights and spotlights will be respected, and things like intensity, the units used by the light, as well as the color and temperature of the light. Now we'll go over a few other things such as materials, how they're going to be exported, but for now let's go ahead and export the scene. So again, we're going to go back to File and then Export, and we'll choose DATASMITH as our file type and just give it a name and hit Export here. On this next window, we can choose from the drop-down here whether or not we want to export selected objects or visible objects. Visible objects is the entire scene, so we'll choose that. This final window after the export process is an output dialog that tells you any kind of errors that you may have had in the export process. In this case, we don't have any other than a little bit of information here that tells us DATASMITH automatically converts bump maps into normal maps for us. Now we need to go into Unreal, and we're going to click on the Import DATASMITH button here at the top. We'll browse to that DATASMITH file and go ahead and import it. First of all, we need to specify where we want the DATASMITH files to go. We'll go ahead and right-click here and choose New Folder, and we'll call this DATASMITH Import. Next, we'll hit the OK button, and here we have the first part of this window for the DATASMITH import options, the ability to choose what we want to import. So we want geometry, materials and textures, lights, and if we had cameras, we could do that, but we don't. But there's a little button here below this, and that's the Show Advanced button. We're going to open that up, and that gives us our static mesh options. And what this does is it allows us to control the light map generation that DATASMITH will do. First of all, we have minimum light map resolution, and then we have maximum light map resolution. Now, maximum light map resolution, that's going to allow us to specify the actual size in pixels of our light map, the actual texture it generates. So this will be a 512 by 512 light map. Minimum light map resolution will help us to control the packing of that light map texture. What I like to do here is match these values. So if I'm going to have a 512 by 512 light map texture, I'll also put in 512 for the minimum light map resolution. And what this does is it uses the maximum amount of space that it can on that light map texture while still maintaining good padding between the different shells. And then we just hit the import button to begin the process. Once it finishes, you should see the DATASMITH asset, the entire scene, in the level here. And if not, if we need to, we can simply drag it into the scene by grabbing the asset here and dragging and dropping it into the scene. We could even have multiple copies of the asset. So if we did want to have two versions that we can look at, maybe one's got some different setup, maybe we've added some different furniture in one versus the other, we could certainly do that. We simply drag another copy into the viewport. All right, so once the scene is imported, we normally begin to add interactivity to the scene here, as well as beginning to work on our light maps. Now, we won't be covering that in this course, but be sure to check out some of the other courses on architectural visualizations to learn more about that process. For now, let's look at adding custom collision meshes to objects in the scene and discuss briefly why we need to do that.